Hey, I'm Father Roderick, and welcome to my in-depth analysis of the second chapter of the Book of Boba Fett, the Tribes of Tatooine. The title alone just grabs my attention as a priest. I will tell you exactly why in a minute. But let me first tell you that this is one of the best Star Wars episodes I've seen in a very, very long time. This is, I think, a masterpiece. It is way better than the first episode of the series, and well, if you've seen my review of the first episode, I was pretty stoked about that one, but this one surpasses everything I expected. There is so much to talk about. There are so many details. And this is not just a great episode visually and in terms of execution, but also story-wise. There are fundamental Star Wars themes that go all the way back to A New Hope, and you find them in every fiber of the Star Wars mythology, and they are brought together here in this narrative in a fantastic way. And there are also a ton of religious and biblical references in this episode, which you may not have been aware of when you first saw the episode, because that, of course, is something you need to do before you watch this in-depth review. There are going to be tons of spoilers, so I'm just going to assume that you've seen the episode beforehand. And if you haven't done so already, well, what are you waiting for? Come on, this is Star Wars at its best. So go and watch that episode and then return here, and together we will dive into this episode. Let me start by saying that Steph Green, who directed this episode, did a fantastic job. She has a lot of television experience. She directed some episodes of The Americans, great series by the way, Watchmen, Luke Cage, and now she is bringing so much to the table, and I think the results of her direction are excellent. And of course, a series like this is not just the work of a director. The writers, showrunners in television are super important. The special effects department, everyone has worked hard, so hard, to bring you the top of what they can do with Star Wars. And oh my gosh, the Tribes of Tatooine starts with a recap, and that is always, I never skip through the recaps because they are also telling the story. They help you focus on what is important for this particular part of the story. And so you always have to carefully listen to what is said in that recap. It starts with Boba Fett talking to us and saying, "Fate sometimes steps in to rescue the wretched." Now, of course, he's talking about his own redemption here. Fate and destiny is very often a theme in Star Wars. And fate and destiny always are related to a calling, to a vocation, to put it in religious terms. And in this case, it is clear that fate has stepped in to redeem Boba Fett from his previous life because that is necessary for his future vocation. He's got a calling here. He's got a job to do. And fate has grabbed him from the depths of the pits of Tatooine, from the tentacles of this horrible monster, and put him back on the planet because, well, it's his adventure. He has got a book to write. Then we are reminded very briefly in a few scenes of the motor gang that robbed this poor moisture farmer in episode 1. Boba Fett witnesses that, and they also vandalize the home of the farmer. We will meet them again in this episode. Then the mayor is also referred to in this recap. He too will be back, and we see the scene in which it's made clear that the mayor is refusing to acknowledge Boba Fett's authority, which makes him, of course, immediately one of the suspects who may be behind the attack by the, what I call, Star Wars ninjas. The members of the Order of the, what was it again? The winds, the light wind, something. Was mentioned briefly in the credits who they are, and of course we will get to know them much better in this episode. Then we again hear the central theme of I think this whole book. It defines the new Boba Fett, and that is the word respect. He doesn't want to rule with fear or violence. No, he will rule with respect. That is how he's going to bring everyone together and acquire the loyalty of the peoples of Tatooine. And I think that's probably also the message that this story wants to convey to us as viewers. Respect is what we need on this planet, and it will help us to come together again, which is something that we desperately need in these difficult times. We also are briefly reminded that Fennec captured one of those Star Wars ninjas, and well, the first scene that we see of this new episode continues from that point. We see this beautiful opening shot, and it leads us into a sequence that mirrors all the events at the beginning of Return of the Jedi. We see Jabba's palace, and it's this beautiful bird's eye shot, and it just zooms down to two tiny little figures that are walking towards the palace. Now, I loved, first of all, the visuals of this scene. What struck me immediately is the beautifully nuanced colors of the landscape, and then the castle or the palace of Jabba, or well, formerly the palace of Jabba the Hutt, that rises up, and it has a very orange hue, which is something I never saw in the existing Return of the Jedi footage. So I think that that's one of the advantages of having all this modern technology. There is just so much subtlety in the overall looks of the planet Tatooine. Tatooine has never looked better than in this episode. What I also immediately noticed is how the camera moves in a familiar way. There was something about that scene, and I was like, I've seen this before, and it's not in Return of the Jedi. And then suddenly it hit me, this is the same camera movement that we see in The Empire Strikes Back on Hoth. When the camera flies down, it flies over the surface of Hoth and then zooms down, and in the distance you see the tiny figures, you know, the Tauntaun that is walking there. And so I love it how even visually and in terms of cinematography, this episode mirrors and kind of rhymes with visual styles that we've seen in existing movies. And I've seen those movies so often that there's something in my subconscious as a Star Wars fan that immediately relates to that. It's like, oh, this feels like Star Wars. And I think it's the camera moves. You also see it in the wipes, you know, when they do a scene transition. It's not just a hard cut. No, there's always either a camera movement that goes upwards or down, or you have this you know, faded wipe from left to right or from right to left or diagonally. That is all classic Star Wars, you could say, language, vocabulary, visual vocabulary that is used in a very subtle way, but for, you know, longtime Star Wars fans, it's immediately recognizable. Now, this focus on these two figures is followed by a few close-up shots where, of course, we recognize it's Fennec with her prisoner, and she is going to bring him in for interrogation. Of course, she's coming from the city and Mos Espa, and apparently Boba is already at the palace, maybe recovering. He's constantly shown in his Bacta tank, so it's clear that he's still healing from all his wounds. And another subtle thing that I noticed in this episode is that Boba Fett already looks stronger than in the first episode. There were some fans that were complaining about old Boba Fett, you know, what, he's supposed to be this fighting machine, and look at him, he's slow and he's clumsy. Well, duh. He's still recovering and he's getting stronger. And I think over time we will see him getting more and more fearsome in these episodes. So everything about these shots near the palace of I keep calling it Jabba's palace is beautiful. It's so well done. The sound design, also, I gotta mention that. The sound design is often forgotten, but sound, of course, is a very important ingredient of our experience of these episodes. And the sound design of the gate, that is opened and then lowers, it just opens a little bit. Why? Because it's bloody hot on Tatooine, and so you don't want all that heat to enter your palace. So it just opens up wide enough for those two people to march in, and then it lowers again, and you have that incredibly well done creaky sound of metal, and it feels huge, even though of course it's not a real set. It's probably done in CGI, but I have to say, all the special effects, the CGI is so hard to detect, and it's way better than in any of the existing Star Wars movies, I would dare to say. And this is television. It's incredible what the special effects team has done. So we then see that Boba Fett is interrogating this guy, and despite the fact that Boba is threatening him with decapitation, which undoubtedly these Gamorrean guards would do in a blink, without blinking probably, in a heartbeat, the prisoner responds with a Huttese insult. And you know where that comes from. It's a chuta. And you're like, okay, I know this insult. It is Huttese, clearly. Where have I heard this before? Well, it's actually not spoken by a Hutt or by a creature. No, it comes from the mouth of a silver-colored protocol droid on Bespin. Remember that C-3PO is walking around on Bespin and he's kind of lost, and then a door opens on his side and this other copy of C-3PO walks out, but other than C-3PO, he is silver instead of gold. And then C-3PO is like, oh, why, someone like me? And then the droid just says, Achuta. And we don't get a translation, not even in the subtitles, which I sometimes do with Huttese, but we know that it is a severe, very serious insult, because C-3PO reacts with the, "Ooh, how rude." So this guy is just being super rude towards Boba Fett, and we see that Boba Fett does not like it when people disrespect him or disrespect anyone. As I said before, respect is maybe one of the most central themes in the Book of Boba Fett so far. So that's why he's triggered, I spared your life and you curse me? The Torture Droid, who now, thanks to the subtitles, has a name, 8D8, 88, says this guy is of the Order of the Night Wind. Now, I had to Google that, of course. That has never been mentioned before in the Star Wars canon or in the Star Wars stories before. But apparently, this is a group of assassins that you can just hire. So, assassins for hire. And apparently their creed knows no mercy. And this is probably why we get that rooftop chase in the first episode. It's a nod to Assassin's Creed, where in the game you do that all the time, as an assassin. You have to jump and do the parkour thing. So I love these little, nods to popular culture and to other franchises, different from Star Wars. So because he's an assassin, he's got this creed, he's got this code that he will not fear human retaliation. But then Fennec, she's like in the background and she says, oh, it's just a man with a hood, He says that he is courageous, but we'll see. Maybe he's not afraid of man, but he may be afraid of a Rancor. And that's when I jumped up in my chair, because he is, she uses the release mechanism, the floor disappears, and the guy falls on the floor of the Rancor pit. And then, visually, it becomes an exact copy of what happens in Return of the Jedi, when it's Luke Skywalker who falls in the pit. And you see that same, the mechanism apparently is still working as it was in Jabba's time. And so the throne advances. So the people on the throne, especially, of course, the ruler, of the palace can get a good look of the carnage down there. And then I am just waiting. I'm like, oh my God, are they going to have a real Rancor? Is there another Rancor? Is this going to be, you know, did they actually have multiple Rancors in the dungeons? You don't know how big those dungeons are. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I so want to see like an upgraded version of the Rancor, because in Return of the Jedi, of course, it's stop motion, which is fantastic, but still, nowadays, I think a Rancor with modern technology could look even more fearsome, but it all sets you up, and they know, they play with our feelings, because we feel just like the guy, you know, oh my gosh, there's going to be a Rancor. Yeah, it was the mayor who sent me. And that's exactly what Fennec was hoping he would do, because it's empty. There is no Rancor. And then to kind of emphasize it, what appears in that opening behind the door is not a Rancor. No, it's a rat. It's just a rat, and it's this tiny, like the mouse droids on the Death Star. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is so. I love it when they do stuff like that. It's this little counterpoint. You expect a huge Rancor, and instead you get, you know, a mouse or a rat. I love it. I love it. I love it. I also think that it's probably, in terms of budget, a wise decision to not go for the Rancor. There's already so much happening in this episode. Yeah, they have to stay under budget, you know. So then, there's one thing. This is the only moment in this episode that I noticed that the inside of the Rancor pit is CGI projected. This was filmed on the set of the stagecraft device. So it's, of course, what they used and developed for The Mandalorian. It's these huge, towering LED screens on which they generate a background through modern CGI technology. And when you move the camera, the background will move along as if you are in a real space. And that has been an enormous time and cost saver for Lucasfilm and for everyone else who's using the same technology. And it was developed for The Mandalorian, and it's used here also in certain scenes, not all of them, of course, but it helps this television show to present us a variety of images and locations that would be cost prohibitive to build them for real, or even to just generate them and use green screen to do this. I think that is why these television series just feel so powerful. So like this could have been a movie in theaters, and I would have gone and paid a ticket. That's how good it is, and we're still watching television. So you got none of those like really wonky, super small sets that we see in some other productions. No, they can go big, because thanks to CGI, you can basically conjure up any space as long as you create a little bit of a foreground set. This is used. The same technique is used later on in this episode as well, but I'll get back to that. But after this great Rancor pit scene, we then switch to the title and the title music, which I start to recognize now, and I start to really enjoy it. Now, I have to talk as a priest and a theologian about this title, because at first it seems that this title was just chosen because of its alliteration. If you've seen my in-depth analysis of the first chapter of the Book of Boba Fett, which if you enjoy this, you should absolutely go check out that video, because I explain at length the different biblical themes that were used as a template for the story of the Book of Boba Fett. And I think that these Bible stories and figures give major clues as to where this story is going to take us later on. So go watch that video as well. But as I explained there, the title of the first chapter is clearly setting us up for a comparison between the person of Moses in the Bible and the person of Boba Fett. A stranger in a strange land is straight from the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus. The book of Boba Fett. This is deliberate biblical reference here. And so at first I was like, okay, well, this title is less exciting. And then it was like, no, wait a minute. This is also a biblical title. And I will tell you why. The Tribes of Tatooine reminds me immediately of another fundamental concept in the Old Testament. And those are the tribes of Israel. For those of you that haven't done Bible school or haven't been raised Catholic like I was, what are those tribes? Well, at one point, you've got all these different sons, and they all are at the head of one of these 12 tribes of Israel. So it shows us, these stories in the Old Testament want to show us that Israel is not just a gathering of random people. No, this is a family. At the head, the leadership of those tribes is done by brothers. They are all a family. And so the drama in the history of Israel is when these tribes start to fall apart and they start to have tensions between them. And so the entire history that we read about in the Old Testament is about the efforts to reunite those tribes of Israel. It has to become a family again. And it is in the story of Moses, again, that these tribes together under not Boba Fett, there you go. It works. Under the leadership of Moses, aka in this version of the world, Boba Fett, are going to travel for 40 years through the desert and will ultimately reach the promised land. Symbol also of their freedom. They were slaves in Egypt. Moses, stranger in a strange land, leads the way into the desert. He is sent and called by God. So he's got to be reborn in a certain way. He goes through the waters of the Red Sea, which is a symbolic moment that in liturgy later on by the early Christians was used as a symbol for baptism. And baptism itself means rebirth. Here in this episode, in this story about Boba Fett, you see the same symbols. Boba Fett has to be reborn, and we will see actually that rebirth in this episode later on, because he is called to be a new Moses. Well, a new Moses, there is no old Moses in the Star Wars galaxy, but for the sake of explanation, he's another Moses. And he will lead the tribes of Tatooine to their freedom, to a new future, to a promised land. No longer the Tatooine that is, pillaged by external forces. No, it's their country. They have to claim it. And Boba Fett is their Moses. Now, speaking of which, you know how the story of Moses ends. So he successfully unites the tribes of Israel as they march through the desert for many, many years. But before they are able to enter the promised land, Moses dies. He is not going with them into the promised land. And when I realized that, I got a little bit nervous. It's Joshua who leads the 12 tribes of Israel into the promised land. But could this be foreboding what will happen at the end of this Book of Boba Fett? Are they going there? I don't know. Anyway, we then, after this title that has so much meaning, now you know, we then get this amazing flyover of Maz Espa, or actually it's the suburbs of Maz Espa. They are, it's a part of the city that has kind of grown out of that hole in the ground or that valley that we see. And this is such a stunning shot. I think it's a combination, correct me if I'm wrong, of both a miniature set, because it's very detailed, but it looks just too tangible for just being CGI. But I think it is combined with little CGI people walking around and some land speeders and stuff. And then you fly into that valley, you get that same shot that we saw in the first chapter of this bustling city. and you see the colors, you see all the marketplaces, you really understand that this used to be the most important city on the planet. It was one of the few rich cities. And why was it so rich? Well, due or thanks to the Hutts. They brought their illegal practices to Mos Espa many, many decades ago. I don't actually know how many years, but they've been there for a very long time. And because of their slave trading, arms trading, drugs, you know, the spice from castles, the mines of Castle, they've grown very, very rich. And of course, the city, everybody that worked with the Hutts, you know, took advantage of that influx of credits, of money. And so I love how just one flyover establishes that and shows us also a city congruent with the history of Mos Espa that has been developed before in the expanded universe. We then see that Boba and Fennec are heading for the mayor, together with their prisoner. So, and while they're on their way to the city hall, we see some shots of people at both sides of the road. There are some terraces, some bars there. They have these same round tables that we see also in the cantina in Mos Eisley. And I think that we see a number of Trendotions, you know, these reptilian creatures. And we see them twice, and they are looking at Boba Fett like, And there was something about the emphasis of the Trendotions that make me think that they too play a role in this story. They may actually, these shots may be a subtle reminder to us of their presence. And we've seen their leader, Doc Strassi is his name. He, this Trandoshan, used to be Boba Fett's boss. And we see this awkward tribute that he's paying to Boba Fett at the palace. He's got this Wookiee fur, so he killed a Wookiee. And he's now serving under Boba Fett's authority. And there's this kind of this scene where Boba Fett acknowledges that this is kind of weird. I used to work for this guy and now he's serving me. And then Doc Strassi tells Boba Fett something that at first hearing sounds benevolent. There may be a threat underneath. May you never leave Mos Espa. Think of the title. Think of what happens to Moses. Is this going to happen to Boba Fett? Just saying. Just throwing that out there. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments. Because we need to talk about this a little bit more. But I was like, Then we see the city hall. And what immediately struck me is, again, that they use this Egyptian architectural style in the way this building is presented to us. I did some research, and there are actually a number of temples in Egypt, in ancient Egypt, that looked very similar to this building. You've got the Philae temple, which is very famous, and then also the Luxor temple. But what they did here is they inverted some of the proportions. So for instance, the Philae temple in Egypt, I've got two side buildings that are tall, and then a smaller building in the middle. They have the same angle to the buildings. Here they do the opposite. Like you've got the big slanted building in the center, and then two smaller ones on the side. But it is, I think, deliberately evoking this Egyptian architecture because, well, this is supposed to remind us of the story of Moses in Egypt, right? It all makes sense. Then you get the town hall scenes, and these are hilarious. I really love the clerk, who is clearly unimpressed and very bureaucratic and a little bit, clumsy. And he's shoved aside, of course, by the major domo. And then what follows is this is a trope. You know, you cannot come in. Our master is busy. He has no time for you. Oh, who says we can't go in? opens the door, and then the major domo is like the secretary, like, oh my gosh, oh, sorry, sir. They just walked in. It's not my fault. And it is like, we've seen this scene in so many other movies and TV shows, and this is a perfect, trope. It's meant to make us laugh. And it works. It totally works. Great work also here on this stagecraft set, because none of the backgrounds are there physically. I think they just used like an existing set, a bit of furniture, but then the rest of the town hall or the city hall, I think, is generated in CGI. But it's very hard. I know that that's how they must have done it, but it's so difficult to actually see it. That's how flawless the mixture of CGI and practical effects is in this episode. And then we get to see Mok Shaiz, or Shaiz, Mok Shaiz. He looks stunning. I think it's a puppet, actually. I think it's a practical, he's there on the set. And because there's so much detail there, he's a little bit older than the Ithorians that we've seen in previous movies. Of course, the first time we see an Ithorian is in the cantina scene in A New Hope. And he's using the same language here. There's a little opening on the side, and he uses that to speak into a translator. So there's a translation device on the back of his head, and that, like Google Translate, does like an automatic translation of what he's saying. And I've always wondered how these Ithorians could communicate with, non-Ithorian species. This is probably how they did it. They just have a mobile translator. But this scene is just so well done, and the costumes. I haven't raved about the costumes in this series yet, but oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. The colors are popping, the styles are vibrant, everything is great. And even the soldiers in the background, they've got these leather, not really harnesses, but it's leather protection gear, and it's just so beautifully crafted. So, thumbs up for the art department that did all the design, because it's just, everybody did such a great job on this series. We then again learn that Boba Fett is called the Daimo, the new Daimo. This is a term that is not from the Star Wars universe, but comes straight from Japanese culture. A Daimo was a feudal lord in Japan, starting in the 12th century all the way to the 19th century. Now, these were actually large landowners, which is how Boba Fett presents himself in these episodes time and again. He's like, I am the new ruler of the land, and everyone else has to abide by my rules and only works through my authority, including the mayor of Mos Espa, because I own the land. You're just a mayor of the city. You just have to make sure that everything, is functioning well. But I am actually giving you orders. And if you don't obey me, if you don't pay me tribute, you're out of here. That is why there's so much tension, which kind of surprised me in the first chapter. Is like, wait a minute, the mayor has been there for much longer than Boba Fett. But that's apparently how this feudal system works on Tatooine. It makes sense. Now, a daimo also was supposed to have an army of samurai warriors, and those warriors would protect the land and would protect also the people that are working and living on that land. So the word daimo in Japanese means two things. The first part, dai, means big or great, and myo means name, but it doesn't refer to the name of the person who is called the daimo, but it's the name, it's actually called the title of the land. So it's the carrier of the great title of the land. So you could translate it as the owner of great land. That is what Boba Fett is here. Now, Mok Shaiz has this Nightwind assassin killed, and he then elegantly shifts the blame to yet another group of creatures on Tatooine. he shifts the blame to the twins. And they have now claimed what was previously owned by their cousin. And we, 1 and 1 is 2. It is, of course, Jabba the Hutt, who was killed. And now his relatives, cousins, a female and a male slug, or Hutt, are coming basically to claim their power and their right to continue to exploit Mos Espa and Tatooine and its inhabitants and its tribes. And of course, Boba Fett is not going to let that happen. Then, when Boba Fett, then he says, well, thank you for killing those people, because actually these assassins cannot work outside the confines of the Hutt space. That is how we know that these are Hutts that are still apparently in charge in this area, or pretend to be in charge. And then he does something to demean, to humiliate Boba Fett. It's a power play that's happening here. So he orders his major domo to give some money to Jabba, or to Fennec, as a reward for his duties as a bounty hunter. Thank you so much for bringing this criminal in, because he's not supposed to work here, because, I am in charge here. And then Boba Fett, he uses the same power play, but he turns things around. And he's like, I am no longer a bounty hunter, but I will take your money as the tribute that you owe me, that you should have paid me last week, but you didn't. And so I love that. Boba Fett is not impressed. That is a recurring theme in this Book of Boba Fett. He's like, okay, sure, really? Well, you know what? I'm still the boss. Just give me your money. And then Boba Fett wants to walk away, and then the Ithorian says, oh, you know what? I'm going to give you a tribute, but I'm going to give you advice, valuable advice. Running a family, and this is important, running a family is more complicated than bounty hunting. So he's basically, from one leader to another. You think it's easy to take the lead here? Wait until you meet your family. And this is not just referring, of course, to the encounter with the Jabba's family that is just around the corner, literally. But this also has a second meaning. This is a warning that it will be very hard for Boba Fett to unite the different tribes of Tatooine into one family, of which he is the father figure. So this is also foreshadowing what will probably be the plight of Boba Fett throughout this entire book. And that is, bringing all these different tribes, these different clans together under one family, or in one family. And that's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. But it makes the story so compelling. We can identify with that plight. If Boba Fett was presented just like a crime lord doing evil things, that gets old very quickly. But this is something everybody comes from a family. And we all know that families are not always perfect, and there are many broken families. And so how important it is to come together as a family, or to reunite. We can all relate to that. So then Boba Fett is sent to what is called Garsa's sanctuary, which is not really a temple, although, it's a casino. It's a bar run by Madame Garsa Fwip, the orange-colored Twi'lek. We see Rex again, the droid from Star Tours. At the gambling table, we see an alien at the table gambling, and he's got the head of a mouse. And I think that we've seen his species before in the Cantina Band in A New Hope. It's one of those moments where you see a little mistake, because the actor who wears the mouse head, the glass eyes are transparent, and there's this one scene where you can see straight through the one eye, through the other one, and you can still see the bar behind, so you see it's a prop. But anyway, this particular version of that species looks really, really good. We see also Max Rebo, who apparently just works there every evening playing with his band. And we don't understand right away what is meant by, this family business, but we're about to discover because Madame Garza is nervous, sweating like a Gumta on Mustafar. Now, I know what Mustafar is. It's, of course, the lava planet where Darth Vader has his palace and where the floor is always lava. But I don't know what a Gumta is. And I searched for it everywhere, and I can't find it. So this may just be one of those things that Star Wars does a lot. It just casually just gives us some names and refers to events that none of us know. We don't know the story behind it, but it makes you feel like you're in a real universe. These sayings and these names, and I'm pretty sure that over time the expanded universe will tell us what it means, even though probably the writers don't even know what a Gumta is. But I'm sure that either in the comic books or in one of the novels, they will give us a bit of a backstory. They've done that very, very well over the years with the Star Wars movies, and I love that. It's how the universe, the galaxy of Star Wars becomes more and more textured, and they fill it in over time, just like this entire series fills in a lot of the blanks that we had when it comes to Boba Fett, when it comes to Tatooine and the cultures of Tatooine. We get to see so much of the culture of all these different tribes. For that alone, I think the series is absolutely indispensable material for any Star Wars fan. Now, apparently, these twins are back. That, of course, refers to this ancient history of Mos Espa, where the Hutts have always been important. I won't repeat myself here. And then Boba Fett clearly knows these twins, because he replies, you know what, these guys are probably just on Nal Hutta. That's actually a planet, a real planet. It's a real planet in Star Wars, but it's an existing planet that was also even, there are stories on Nal Hutta taking place in the age of the Old Republic. It was actually, it's a planet, Hutta, that is often identified as the home planet of the Hutts, but that's not correct. The Hutts actually moved in there. They took over that planet from another population, and it became kind of the hub of the Hutt cartel. It was the central place, like the capital of their empire of Hutt space. And so on Nal Hutta, if you play the Old Republic online RPG, you are familiar with that place because there are a lot of quests happening there in the Hutts. This is where they have their den of thieves. I love the intro sequence with the twin Hutts. They are carried around on a sedan chair, just like the Pharaoh in Egypt. And so it was something that was referred to in the first chapter when, was it Fennec who told Boba Fett, you should be carried around on a sedan chair? And he's like, you know what, I just stand on my 2 feet, and I don't want people to respect me just because I'm sitting on this chair and being lifted up by people. There is a subtle detail when they walk outside. Each time that an extra passes in front of the camera, there's a little bit of dust or sand that follows that person. Now, I was like, wow, that is so subtle, but it anchors the set that we see in reality. And maybe this was filmed outside. Maybe that is just not something they did deliberately. But if they did, oh my, the amount of detail in this episode, kudos to the makers. Thank the maker. All right. The sedan chair approaches. You got these 2 slugs sitting on them, both sweating profusely because, of course, slugs are not supposed to be out there in the open in the sun. And then this detail of the male slug using this poor creature to wipe his forehead. Oh, it's just fantastic. There's also a snack bowl on the sedan chair because, of course, no hut without snacks. So I suppose there are some frogs in there that they can sometimes, feast upon. And then, in this confrontation between the twin huts and Boba Fett, who is not impressed, there is a new person stepping forward, and it is an amazing looking Wookiee. I mean, if you've seen the episode, you were probably like me, or like, oh, wow. That is a good looking Wookiee. But this is not just a new, fierce-looking Wookiee, just that we don't have any backstory of. No, this is a well-known character from the expanded universe. His name is Black Cursantan, and he is a male Wookiee bounty hunter. And his work already starts under rule of the Galactic Empire, and even in the New Republic, he's still working as a very experienced, dangerous bounty hunter. His backstory is that he was captured from his home planet, Kashyyyk, and then he was trained by the Xanti brothers as a gladiator. And then he used that training as a gladiator to work for himself, basically, and become a bounty hunter. And of course Boba Fett knows him because, he used to be a bounty hunter as well. So a good bounty hunter knows his rivals. And so he says, well, you can bring in any gladiator, thereby referring to the backstory that the comic book readers already know, because this, we see at one point, Black Cursantan is working for Dr. Aphra. So he knows the backstory, but now we also know this. And I love the looks of this. And, well, if they develop this entire costume, you can bet that he's going to be back in the future. And so are the Hutts, because they're not done with Boba Fett. They have a brief confrontation, and then they decide, well, you know what, it's too hot for a fight. Let's just get out of here. But we'll be back. Sleep lightly, Boba. Another threat, another party who is, just using these veiled threats to let Boba Fett know that it's not going to be easy to reunite the tribes of Tatooine. And he may not actually live to see the day that Tatooine is free. Let's see, what else? What else? Oh, but even Obi-Wan Kenobi knows about and I think even has an encounter in the comics, I think, with Black Cursantan. Even Darth Vader during the Galactic Civil War, I had to look this up, I don't know this by heart, but Darth Vader at one point hired the Wookiee bounty hunter. Very, very cool. All right, so the Hutts say, see you later. And then we've got this nice transition to another sequence in the Bacta tank. Now, these are always important because they will fill in a little bit more of the blanks when it comes to the history of Boba Fett, or at least the history after his escape from the Sarlacc pit. The scene transition here is very subtle. Camera moves upwards, and all of a sudden we're in, something that looked like a bedroom, but instead of a bed, there is a Bacta tank. More dreams. We've got this, and this is the sequence that I love the most of this episode, and I thought it was brilliant. We see how Boba Fett is initiated to become one of the tribe, one of the clan. And it has to do with this Gaddarfi stick, or well, I used to call it just a gaffy stick, but apparently the official name is a Gaddarfi stick. His initiation starts with training. Again, this is a movie trope. Think of the Batman, in The Dark Knight, where he's got to learn how to fight. Think of the very first few episodes of Game of Thrones, where there's fighting with a wooden sword, because before we can give you a real sword, you have to prove that you can defend yourself with a practice sword. And so here we see Boba Fett being trained by one of the elders of the Tusken Raider clan with a wooden gaffy stick. It's awesome. Um, and then in the middle of that, at the beginning of this training, there is this hover train that arrives. And I'm like, wow, a hover train on Tatooine, where are the tracks? Does it make sense to have a train on Tatooine? And then I'm thinking, well, yeah, actually, it's a very efficient form of transport. Plus, it's easy to protect it, to guard it, which is shown immediately because this train is heavily guarded. And the sand troopers apparently have already been spotted by the guards inside the train, and the shooting begins, and it's horrible. A lot of these sand people die. Some of the banthas are killed, which is always heartbreaking. Poor animals, and it's horrible. Nobody expected this train. Nobody expected this attack from within the train. We've seen a hover train before, so it's not exactly new to the Star Wars universe. Apparently, there are some hover trains on Coruscant. But we've, of course, seen the famous train heist scene, the hover train scene in Solo. And we're going to see kind of a new version of a train heist in a certain way, or at least an attack on a train. And I'll compare them with what we saw in Solo. But this attack by the guards of the train has devastating consequences for this small tribe. And Boba Fett is helping his companions to bury the dead. Well, actually, they're not burying the fallen, but they are cremating them. They're burning them. This is something that is obviously often done on Tatooine. We know of the scene where Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker discover that the entire crew of the Sandcrawler, the Jawa crew, has been assassinated by according to, well, they made it, it was the stormtroopers, but they made it seem as if it was an attack by the Sand People, thereby continuing to kind of set these different tribes up against each other. But of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who's got some experience on Tatooine, he's like, no. Sand People would always travel single line, to hide their numbers. So this is something else. But why are there no funerals? Why are there no burials on Tatooine? I think there's actually an explanation for that. And it's something that we saw in the last chapter. Remember that there is this sand creature hiding underneath the surface and trying to hunt for creatures that are looking for those water pods, or we learn in this episode that they're called black melons for water. What if the reason that there are no burials on Tatooine, but instead they do cremations, is because if you bury someone, it may attract these hidden predators. You've got the crate dragons that are underground. Maybe there are other creatures lurking under the sand. And if you bury these bodies, it's food for them, so they might attack your burial place, and that may also, desecrate the corpses of the fallen. So instead of doing that, they do a funeral pyre. How do you call that? Like a big fire, basically. So I like that detail. There's a lot of thought that went into the development of these cultures that we get to see. We also notice that Boba really identifies with the plight of the Sand People, and he vows to help them defeat whoever is shooting at them from the train. And then we get something that just made me nerd out so much as a Star Wars fan. We go to Tashi Station. We go to Tashi Station. I always want to go to Tashi Station. I never had time. I had to help my uncle with the harvest first. No, Tashi Station. And, oh my goodness, when we enter the bar, the small bar, we are in a familiar place. because this is part of Star Wars canon. If you've ever listened to the radio play versions of A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, they're all great, but A New Hope, the radio play, is fantastic. If you're a Star Wars fan and you've never listened to the radio dramatization of A New Hope, it's absolutely worth your while. And we get a lot of backstory, and we get a lot of scenes that take place on Tosche Station. And we learn what Luke did there. And we hear from his friends. And there are actually two of his friends, Cammy and Blaze, and he's got a surname Fixer, that we meet at Tosche Station in those extra scenes that are only part of the audio drama. And they are sitting here in the bar. They are there. And it's actually really, you can look it up in the credits, it's actually Cammy and it's actually Fixer. Not played by the original actors, by the way, but because those actors are pretty old by now, but they're played by new actors. So the roles have been recast. And here we see Mandy Kowalski and Skylar Bible. They play Cammy and Fixer. And wow! I mean, wow! and then it's not just a background role. No, Fixer actually stands up to this motorbike gang. What's their name? I think they're called the Niktos. And then, of course, he lives to regret it because he's almost killed by these very violent Niktos. These are the same guys that robbed the moisture farmer. And then you get that scene, the doors open and you see the silhouette, the shadow of Boba Fett. We've seen that one before. This same entrance, this very same visual was one of the first scenes in the first episode of The Mandalorian. You know, also in a bar, and then door opens, and Mando is standing there in the door opening. And here, it's Boba Fett. Again, visual rhyme. This is Star Wars poetry at its best. Again, kudos. Kudos to the cinematographer. Kudos to the director. Kudos to the writers. Kudos to the art directors to come up with that. And then, of course, Boba is taking over. He's just had some extra training. He's getting stronger because of the Bacta. And so, wow, this fight is so well executed. Choreography is fantastic. You feel how strong Boba has become and how agile he is with the gaffy stick. Very, very cool fight. And then he takes the bikes, which is hilarious, brings them back to the camp. Of course, the Tusken Raiders are like, okay, let's deconstruct that for parts. And Boba was like, no. I'm going to teach you how to ride these. We need these for our defense. And then what follows is this amazing bike training sequence, which is so much fun and looks so good. I mean, we've seen these speeder bikes before in The Mandalorian in the previous 2 seasons, but I don't know how they did it, but in one way or another, they just feel there. They feel so real. This is definitely the best speeder bike sequence that I've seen so far. You could always tell that it was fake, that it was CGI or just, practical bikes in front of a green screen, but here it's flawless. And the jumping from, he's trying to teach them how to jump not from horse to horse like in a Western, but from speeder bike to speeder bike. It's classic Western vocabulary here. And then you see some failed attempts, of course, and then, these guys are tenacious. They want to learn. And ultimately, they know how to jump from one speeder bike to another. And that's when they are ready. That's when you know, as a viewer, that they are ready for the next confrontation with the train. Let's see. We then get that train sequence, which is kind of hard to comment upon because it's just a visual spectacle. One thing I want to say is that it looks even better, and I think it's better paced and more convincing than the train sequence in the Solo movie. And that's high praise because Solo movie is a movie. Huge budget. This is a television episode. I keep pinching me. It's like, this is television. How is this possible in a television show? But it is, and it is done so incredibly well. I loved this scene. Of course, all is classic Western, let's jump on that train and fight the bandits, but then in Star Wars. But it totally works. There's not one single moment where I'm like, they're kind of exaggerating a little bit, or this is pushing the boundaries of disbelief. No, this feels like this is what a train sequence is supposed to look like. Loved the choreography of this. And then, once they finally managed to derail the train, despite the fact that there are no rails. Oh gosh, I forget about the driver droid who is in front of the of the locomotive. He's so good. It's so funny. And you get all the tension of like he's constantly rerouting the power, and then he's using this big rocket. Oh, by the way, the rocket that is propelling the train is absolutely visually reminding us of the rockets that are used, the motors, engines that are used in the pod race on Mos Espa, or on Tatooine in Mos Espa. And so, but this evil droid is using the boost, or the nitro function of the train to blast sand people off the top of the train. I was like, wow, so imaginative. And then of course the scene where he's kicked out of the train, and then it turns out that his upper body is like looking really, really impressive, but he's just got these tiny legs and he's like a little spider. Like, whoa. Loved it. Absolutely adored it. And I want to see a Lego version of this train. Oh my gosh, yes. This would be such a great playset. We then get to meet the syndicate, or the members of the syndicate, hired to protect this train. And a visual thing that I really loved was that their masks, the part of their armor, actually looks like an abstract version of their real faces. So when they take off the mask, you see that the mask resembles their real face. And these actually, well, they're pretty good sharpshooters. Not as good as the sand people, by the way, because, oh my goodness, the sniper abilities of these sand people. They're on this hill, and they've got this wonky rifle, and yet, like, stop, they just shoot straight over a huge distance. They shoot into the windows of the train. Whoa, that was really impressive. And also, in retrospect, makes you remember the sand people following Luke's land speeder with their rifles? It makes that scene much more dangerous, because they're like, oh my gosh, that land speeder is so tiny in the distance, and these sand people have these clunky rifles. How is that a threat for Luke? Well, apparently, in retrospect, it was a huge threat, because these guys are very, very good at shooting. So we learn that these guards are members of the Pike Syndicate, and Boba is trying to bring them in. What if I will protect you? You know what? These sand people, it's another tribe of Tatooine, they will protect you while you are going to, do what I tell you to do. And so I loved it that this was another moment, it was very brief, that Boba Fett is turning his enemies and the enemies of his friends into his allies in a very, very short time. That is a huge display of leadership. We also learned why the train was so heavily guarded. What is it carrying? What's worth protecting with so much firepower on Tatooine? There's just sand and water. Well, turns out the train was transporting weapons, water, and drugs, spice, from the spice mines on Castle. And that obviously shows why it had to be guarded. Also shows you who's probably behind this whole train thing. It's the Hutts, of course. They just continue their business. We then, when these two tribes are working together, two down, How many to go? I don't know. Maybe the Jawas will be also included in the story, or maybe we'll get to meet some other peoples on Tatooine. This is followed by what I think is the highlight of the episode. And I can't believe I'm saying this because I've already shared so many highlights with you, but the best is yet to come. They kept the best for last. We now get to see Boba Fett's initiation and his rebirth, his baptism, and his ordination, I would say. Let me explain what I mean. And this is also where the religious symbolism is at its strongest and most obvious, but maybe not obvious for everyone. That's why I'm explaining it. We now learn that in the past, and this is told to Boba Fett by one of the Tusken Raiders, in the past, the oceans on Tatooine have dried up. Climate crisis, who knows? But I was like, well, wait a minute, there were oceans on Tatooine? That is why it's called the Dune Sea. Really? And that since water became a very rare good, the other tribes have been killing each other to survive, not the Sand People. The Sand People learned that sometimes it's better to just run away and to hide. That's why they have a reputation of being easily scared. It's been their survival mechanism. Instead of fighting, and maybe they were not the strongest of tribes, their strength was to hide their numbers, to learn how to be sneaky. So you see how this backstory starts to fill it in, and it all starts to make sense. All the behavior that we've seen of the Tusken Raiders, that I'm pretty sure that George Lucas never developed in his head, and it's now all coming together like pieces of the puzzle. That this is why this is such an amazing episode. Good grief! How can you be so critical about Star Wars when there's pure genius at work here in this chapter? But anyway, so there's no more water on Tatooine, or very little water. But now these tribes have been at each other's throat. This is now it shows you why this episode is called the Tribes of Tatooine, and why Boba Fett is Moses. It's his job to bring these rival tribes together and to show them that they're not each other's enemy, but if they work together, they can stand up against the one enemy that threatens their survival and their future, and that's all these external, exploiting powers, be it the Empire or the Hutts. They don't belong on that planet. They don't own the land. We hear that these Tusken Raiders have ancestral claims, and just like Native Americans, this whole episode, especially this last part, is a clear metaphor of the plight of the Native Americans, and to a lesser extent, maybe also the Maori on New Zealand or the Aboriginals in Australia. They too have been exploited. They too have been made slaves and have been abused by foreign powers. And it's only now, gradually, that we're starting to realize what our ancestors have done and how much our wealth and our prosperity and our economy is actually built on slavery, exploitation, a total lack of respect of the dignity of the people that originally owned the land and still have a claim on it. That is the political background of this episode, or at least the political context, I should say, of this story. It wants to also tell us something about the world in which we live. In a certain way, if Mos Espa is a metaphor of the Western world and our wealth, and who are we? Hutts? Do we want to be part of that family, or do we want to be, joining Boba Fett in his vocation, his calling, to put an end to these practices and to start respecting the original people that owned the land and pay back what belongs to them, not to us. We've just been stealing it over centuries. My country, the Netherlands, has also a very bad reputation when it comes to slave trading in the past. And the fact that we're one of the richest, most prosperous countries in the world, that's not because of us. There's no merit in what we did. It's because we've been sailing the oceans to go steal it from other countries. Oh well, that's how deep this episode is. But there's more to say. As I said, this is also a very strong religious, symbolic moment in the chapter. We see more of the initiation ritual of Boba Fett, and it rhymes with another initiation rite and training that we're very familiar with, that of Luke on Dagobah by Yoda. Remember, there's a lot of training, there's a lot of failure during Luke's training. He gives up all the time. Oh, it's too big, I can't do it. Only in your mind, you know? He's got to learn a lot. He's got to unlearn a lot of his preconceived ideas, and he's got to learn a new way of looking at himself, looking at the Force, looking at the world. And then once the training is at a certain level, it needs to be tested. And the big trial, the big test, you could say that, the trial by fire is entering that tree on Dagobah. What's in there? You don't need your weapon. Your weapons, no need for them. You only bring yourself. So it's the ultimate confrontation with yourself. And we've seen this time and again in Star Wars. Think of the mirror scene in The Last Jedi, where Rey has to face her past, or the lack thereof. You know, there's always these same sequences in which part of the ritual is this descent into hell in a certain way. And Boba Fett has already kind of descended into hell, as I explained in my analysis of Chapter 1. But this is the ritualistic version of that. He's got to relive that moment and interpret it in a broader context, the context of his life, the context of the meaning of his life, and the context of his calling. So, here too, there is a tree. It's not like the tree on Dagobah, but it has the same function. And the tree is in a dream state. How do you get to that tree? You need a guide. And this is it was a very shocking sequence. But it's almost the lizard that enters the brain of Boba Fett is almost like, is this really happening? Or is this also part of the dream? And I think later on Boba Fett even jokes about that. And he says, I wish that thing was part of my dream. And I think that this is consciously or subconsciously referring to, well, two big movies, of course. First of all, Wrath of Khan, you know, this insect that enters the ear of poor Sulu. I think it was Sulu, right? And takes over the brain, turns him into an obedient zombie. This scene was just as gruesome. But also another movie, all of a sudden there's a lot of attention for these movies, the first Matrix movie. Remember that Neo is in this process of being initiated to the truth. And one of the hardest moments to watch is that they unleash this metallic insect that enters him through the navel and has to literally remove from the inside what was poisoning him, what was keeping him in the Matrix. It's this snitch thing that was inside of him. Or actually, no, yeah, well, apparently the insect entered him through the navel, and now it has to be removed in the car, you know, in that sequence. And it's so gruesome. But it is necessary to root out what was keeping him in the Matrix, to make him, free him from his chains, so he can take the next step and take the red pill and awaken. Well, the rest is history. At least the rest is Matrix history. Same story here. The lizard enters the nose of Boba Fett and guides him to the tree. Now, there may actually be an in-world explanation why this happens. We've seen these creatures with psychic powers before. Think of Solo, the big slug, you know, who is able to read minds, but while doing that also can destroy you, destroy your sanity. This is a lizard, also probably can manipulate psychically, it's not explained how, the brain. But the in-world explanation may be that this lizard needs that tree or feeds upon the tree or whatever. But it's a tiny lizard. And the desert is huge, and these trees are clearly very, very rare. So it makes sense that these small creatures use bigger creatures as their host to carry them, to transport them to the tree. And I don't know if the lizard can sniff out the trees like that, but at least he doesn't have to walk all by himself with all the risks of being eaten. Well, you just take your, someone who can hunt you, can crush you with your feet. And then because you enter, I imagine that if you're sleeping in the desert outside, the same might have happened. These lizards might enter your nose. So, but anyway, that's very, very detailed commentary. I know. But he is brought in a kind of a dream state to this tree. And the branches start to move, and they start to strangle him. And of course, you immediately understand this is a symbolic moment. These branches are symbols of the chains that have held Boba Fett captive. They are like tentacles. But they're not just the chains, the physical chains that the Sand People made him wear, but it's also all the psychological chains, the chains of his past, the chains of his sins, and all his bad decisions in the past, his traumas. All that is now trying to strangle him, and he will have to break free. He has to do that himself. No one else can do it for him. So this is like a therapy session, but inside the world of Star Wars. And it's similar also to Luke Skywalker. For him, in order to progress in his training and get to the next step, he's got to break with his greatest fears. What is holding him back is the fear that there is Darth Vader inside of him, So here too, Boba Fett is breaking free of those chains, of those branches, and we see these flashes of water, lots and lots of water, huge waves, ocean waves, and these may both refer to the past of Tatooine, covered in oceans, but also remind us of Kamino, a water planet, and we get to see a few more brief scenes with Daniel Logan, who played young Boba Fett. And I think that for Daniel Logan as an actor, that must be so cool to get a phone call by Lucasfilm saying, hey, you're going to be back, We're going to show more of your acting that you did so many years ago when you were just a kid, but we will validate your place in the saga as well. I think it's great. It's really, really, again, kudos to Lucasfilm for being so attentive to the legacy that these actors left us with. So the last flash is this huge wave of water, and then whoop, he's in the sand in his white outfit, his white jumpsuit. I've explained in my previous analysis, white symbol of rebirth, referring also to the white robes that newly baptized people receive after they are baptized. And he emerges from this vision of water, baptism, liberated from what held him captive in his former life. And he's now ready for the next step. And what is that next step going to be? Consecration or ordination. There is a visual sequence here that is obviously referring to Catholic liturgy, the liturgy of ordination, liturgy of consecration of a monk. And he receives in silence, and it's almost in a kind of church temple-like environment. He receives these new vestments, and they look like Jedi robes. There's a hood. There are these, at first I thought it was a stole, but it's these bandages around his arms, a little bit like in the Tridentine liturgy before Vatican II, where priests would wear also bandages or, pieces of cloth around their hands. etc. So this is clearly an ordination scene. He's being consecrated for his new vocation, his new task. And if he is to be a shepherd of all these tribes of Tatooine, he actually fulfills the role of a bishop, right? That's what a bishop is. A bishop is a shepherd. And he has to shepherd his people and hold them together and guard the unity and protect his flock from outside dangers. This is an episcopal ordination. But a bishop needs a staff, right? You know where I'm going. The gaffy stick. That's going to be his new staff. But he needs to forge it himself. He needs to have earned his own weapon. Similar to the Jedi at the end of their training, what do they do? What is one of the final steps in the ascension to the rank of the Jedi? You have to make your own lightsaber. You cannot buy that in a store. You know, it's not Disneyland. No, you have to make your own lightsaber. And that's hard to do, that's difficult to do. And each lightsaber will have its own kyber crystal, its own color, to tell the world, this is me. I identify with this color. This is what happens here in this wonderful visual sequence where Boba Fett takes this branch that he took with him from this tree and then, with the help of his new family, learns how to change that into a fortified gaffer stick or gaffy stick. And this whole initial ritual, there are moments where you clearly feel that they were inspired by Native American culture and rituals as well. And of course, that culminates in the celebration of the completion of the initiation. That's a lot of shun words. But anyway, initiation is done, and now it's time to celebrate that. But not just with a party. No, we also celebrate it with you could say a liturgical dance in a certain way, around a fire, a ritual dance. That, what does a dance do? You can dance alone, sure. But what makes a true dance is when you dance together and you all make the same movements. And these movements in this dance have been inspired by the fighting techniques that we see. And one by one, the Tusken Raiders join Boba Fett in this ritual dance, and they make the same movements, expressing with their bodies that they are one. They are one family. They have one common identity. And for the first time maybe in the history of the Tusken Raiders, a human is now part of their clan, of their tribe. So cool, so cool. And so Boba Fett has made clear that he respects their ancestral claims on the land. He, as a leader, as their leader, he will help to protect them against those that have exploited them and want to continue their exploitation. And he is not ruling these tribes through violence, authority. He doesn't want these Tusken Raiders to obey them because they are afraid of them or because he pays them money. They will want to sacrifice themselves for him because he was willing to do the same for them. They serve him because they respect him. And he can lead them because he has shown them respect. That is what this chapter is all about. Whoa! I did not expect this commentary to become this long. I took a lot of notes. I had a bad feeling about this, but if you're still watching this, thank you. You are among my favorite fans and supporters. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it wasn't too long. Well, it was actually too long, but I hope it wasn't boring because I haven't had time to do all the fancy like illustrations and whatnot. It's just me talking head in front of the camera. But hey, let me know in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. What were the moments that made you go like, am I right? Is this really one of the best Star Wars TV episodes ever? What rating would you give this episode? Let me know in the comments. Is there anything that I missed? Even though we've been talking for almost an hour and a half. Is there anything that you noticed that I missed? Again, share it with the community in the comments. If you like these videos, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to do another live watch party the moment the new episode drops. So that's going to be in the middle of the night for people on the East Coast. It's going to be midnight for those of you in Los Angeles, San Francisco, West Coast. For us in Europe, it's going to be like 9 o'clock in the afternoon. So I hope you can join us. It's fun. So there is this, actually, the recorded watch party is also online, but I've repeated a lot of the stuff that I yelled out while watching the episode here in a more structured form in this commentary. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for your support. Give this video a thumbs up and share it if you want to. If you want to support my work, there's a Patreon page, patreon.com/Father Roderick. Thanks. Hope to see you next week. And may the Force be with you. What else can I say?